On the night of my marriage to John, his greatest enemy died in a car accident. That's when I realized the hidden, deep love John had for her. At the scene of the accident, he wept bitterly while holding her body in his arms. To make up for his regrets, he postponed our wedding and traveled the world with her ashes. When he came to terms with the situation, he returned, ready to marry me. But it was then that he discovered the body at the accident site was mine. When I returned from my business trip, I met with an accident outside John's office. In the midday sun, I lay pale and cold, suspended in the middle of the road. I watched John kneel on the ground, crying uncontrollably, holding the face of the person in his arms, filled with despair and devastation. I looked at Linda in shock. She was clean, gently wiped by John, cradled in his arms as if she were peacefully sleeping. Meanwhile, I lay nearby, disheveled like a rag doll, with my white dress fluttering in the wind, revealing me in a humiliating way to the onlookers. Through all of this, my fiancé never once looked at me. Despite wearing the white dress he had given me and the engagement ring shining on my finger, his eyes saw only Linda. There was no room for anyone else. As the medical staff reluctantly wrapped me in a white cloth and lifted me onto a stretcher, passing by John, he suddenly looked up. I hesitated. Had he recognized me? But in the next moment, he scooped up Linda and rushed past my stretcher, kneeling in front of the medical staff. "Doctor, please save her." In the public eye, John was known for his aloofness and rarely showed emotions. Even in front of me, he always maintained a composed demeanor. Even when his emotions ran deep, he would only whisper praises softly in my ear. But now, for Linda, who had taken so many clients from him, he shamelessly kneeled in front of everyone, crying bitterly. As I scrutinized John's face, his finely sculpted features, as if created by an artist, revealed the total breakdown of his usual restrained expression. His eyes were filled with twisted, intense emotions, like a rabid, out-of-control dog. Now I understood. It wasn't that he couldn't express emotions. It was that all his disdain, anger, and love were directed at Linda. The love that had once filled my heart was stripped away in an instant. I felt nauseous and took a few steps back, not wanting to look at his face anymore. Suddenly, I saw a shattered cell phone screen. It was a white phone with a cute teddy bear charm, Linda's phone. The screen was frozen on a chat interface with John. The last two messages were from John, "I'm getting married," and Linda's reply, "Wait for me." Suddenly, it hit me how I had died. I hadn't told John I was returning from my business trip early. As soon as I landed, I went straight to his office to surprise him. I recalled him standing at the door before I left, gently telling me he couldn't bear to be apart from me and that we would marry when I came back. That memory spurred me to quicken my pace. But downstairs I encountered Linda. Holding her phone, she said softly, with barely perceptible scorn in her eyes, "Take a good look, Emily. As long as I don't agree, your marriage won't happen. He may hate me, but he loves me more. I am the one he fights against in love." With that, she looked at my disheveled state and smirked. "Hope you have some self-awareness and step back voluntarily. I don't want to take action against you." I slapped her across the face. After that, my memory becomes hazy. Only scattered scenes remain: the out-of-control van, screaming pedestrians, and John stumbling toward Linda. For some reason, my soul couldn't stray too far from John. I followed him to the hospital, only to be driven away by Linda's family. Returning home, John locked himself indoors. He turned off his phone and wallowed in drunkenness on the couch. He had once said alcohol was harmful to the brain, and at our engagement banquet he hadn't touched a drop. But now he drank day and night, seemingly intent on drinking himself to death to join Linda. It wasn't until the fourth day that Louis barged in with his assistant and punched John. "John, I know you're in pain, but you must pull yourself together. Aren't you going to her funeral?" John turned his head, his hair disheveled, looking utterly haggard, and chuckled softly. "Louis, I regret it. I should have realized my feelings earlier. When Linda was alive, I was always against her. She never knew I loved her." Louis faltered. "Linda? Not Emily?" At the mention of my name, John hesitated for a moment. He closed his eyes, pressed his forehead, and gruffly asked, "Was she the one who sent you?" But Linda was already dead. What was he fighting with a dead person for? It wasn't that he wasn't going to marry her. The wedding date was simply postponed. Tell her not to make a scene. I watched John, who showed no sign of guilt. The assistant was about to speak, but Louis stopped him with a raised hand. He looked at John coldly and smiled. "All right, since you've made up your mind, wait for her to return from her business trip, and she and I will have a chat. I hope you won't regret it." With that, he and his assistant left. I followed them to the stairs and overheard the assistant cautiously asking, "Shouldn't we tell John about Emily's condition?" Louis hesitated, his voice hoarse. "I'll handle Emily's matter myself. Don't tell John yet. He can't handle it. And most importantly, I don't think Emily would want to see him." Leaning against the doorframe, I watched Louis, his eyes red with tears, and gave a bitter smile. The three of us had grown up together in an orphanage and later attended the same university. After graduation, we co-founded the current company. I remembered the time when John and I used to live in a small basement. When he would come home from work and see me eating instant noodles, he would take me in his arms and lovingly tell me that he would never disappoint me and would always try to make me happy. His biggest dream was to give me a magnificent wedding. But today, he lived in a penthouse in the heart of the city, and his biggest concern was how he could push me out of his life. 3 days passed, and I still couldn't understand how to leave John, but he had remarkably kept himself together. I continued to follow him in disbelief, watching him kneel in front of Linda's house. It was then that I realized he was grieving for Linda's ashes. I had to prepare myself mentally, but it still hurt deeply. A week went by, and John showed no concern for my absence, nor did he show any worry about my state. Yet, he continued to kneel in front of Linda's house, crying for her ashes. Linda's family, driven only by profit, seemed unaffected by the death of their daughter. John had never understood what he was truly sorry for. He didn't want me by his side, and now I knew that running after Linda, he no longer cared for me. Instead of paying for his sins, he drowned every happiness in his life in the memory of Linda. When Louis had last tried to make John understand that he was kneeling for Linda's ashes, I suddenly realized that I had to decide my own fate. I decided that I would start my life on my own, giving John the chance to be free from her ashes and his past. Days later, I had my final meeting with him. His face was weighed down with pain, and there was no hope in his eyes. I told him, "John, you can make your own decisions about your life, and I will make my own decisions. You don't need me, and I don't need you." He didn't say anything, just took a deep breath and lowered his head. This is where the story ends. At that moment, I decided that I had to walk my own path, and I had to step out of John's world of sorrow and regret. His past and Linda's shadow could no longer be my destiny.